Now, about tonight. So we have three amazing speakers tonight that are going to be talking about CX and customer centricity and customer experience. As you probably know, CX is a very hot topic. It's been a hot topic for the past couple of years, and we've been overwhelmed, in fact, by bringing up the topic of CX and having such an amazing turnout and the number of signups that we've had for this event. So thank you very much for coming in tonight. Now, please help me. I'm not going to do an introduction because I usually butcher introductions, so I'd love for the speakers to do the introduction themselves. So please help me welcome Lisa, Mark, and Lisa to the stage, please. Fantastic. Now, can I ask for a quick introduction and to hear about a little bit about your background? Maybe Lisa, we'll start with you. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've been doing for the past few years.
Okay. Well, hello everybody. My name is Lisa D'Amico. I run a consultancy which I'm the founder of called Differentiate, which is essentially a growth advisory business that is really there to help businesses in various many forms, from marketing through to corporate planning and various other things. But my background's been very, very varied, many industries, from advertising, managing partner of DDB for a number of years, Y&R and many of the networks, right through to working for LVMH, Cloudy Bay and Kate Mintel in wine, through to formerly being the global CMO of ESOP in recent years. And I've worked in so many different categories and industries, so that's a bit about me.
Thank you very much. Mark?
Yeah, hi guys. So Mark Cameron, I'm CEO of W3 Digital. So I'll give you kind of like my Potter history. I started my career in advertising in the mid-90s in New Zealand, as you can probably tell by my slightly different vowels. And then by the late 90s I joined a digital agency called Hyperactive, which was kind of the first big digital agency in New Zealand. Eventually got bought out by Accenture. And yeah, I think by about the end of, or middle of 2000, felt like I'd done everything that New Zealand had to offer at that point. So I'd worked on most of the government websites, Air New Zealand, New Zealand Post, etc., etc. Moved to Australia in 2001 with the view of being here for about 12 months because I had a job lined up in New York. And then of course September 11 happened and that job ceased to exist and a lot of things changed. And in that stage I was a digital strategy sort of gun for hire, I suppose, working with Heinz, Telstra, a bunch of other organisations. And then 2003 I joined the company I'm with now. By 2007 I'd taken it over and restructured it. And then I moved it from being originally a sort of branding comms business into becoming a digital agency, then a digital consultancy, and then now what we are is a management consultancy that helps organisations go through digital transformation, digital change, and we have a wide variety of capabilities to help organisations do that, and we predominantly in enterprise space.
Thank you very much. Is the audio quality good for everyone? Just show your hands if it's not. Thank you very much.
Great clarity.
Lisa.
Well, I'll throw you because I actually grew up in the poultry industry. So from there I went into printing, something a little bit different, and cut across everything from business forms printing to sheet fed and every type of printing you can possibly imagine. Started some of the first print managements and ended up on site at the likes of Ford and Shell.
So you might be off. Why don't you grab this one?
How unusual for me to be quiet. Nina's laughing somewhere up the back. So having quite a diverse background in printing, I actually, I was running a very large printing company and I wanted to buy a digital company and they said, oh no, you're cannibalising your own work. I said, you're very narrow-minded. If you don't give the customer what they want, they'll choose it with their own feet. And so the board and I had a slight disagreement and I left. And their people tell me I went from the shithouse to the penthouse, because my next move after a bit of consulting was actually to start up a digital agency. And on the day I started, they signed an agreement with what was to become Salesforce Marketing Cloud. And from there, with the most spectacular team, we became one of the top 10 partners globally. And it was absolutely amazing. It's the most humbling experience of my life. I walked in there with all these creds, and I'd run companies and I'd done all these things, and I thought, yeah, you're really rocking it. You know, you're a great chick, really clever. And I got in there and I went, you know, it's just email, can't be that hard. Oh, shit. It was the biggest learning curve of my entire career. I had to take my ego, I had to stick it in my pocket, and I had to absolutely go back to the basics and allow all these 26-year-olds, 28-year-olds, 31-year-olds teach me. Because a lot of us CMOs, you know, we don't go back to school. We're just learning on the job. Well, I went back to school with all these guys. I literally went to the Salesforce courses and you know, sat there and I learned how everything worked. And the crowning glory of all my days there was the day I corrected our CTO and said, "You've missed that." He said, "Yeah, you have." I said, "Man, I've got it. I am good." So that was absolutely fabulous. And then I worked for an organisation called Eric Insurance, where with my collective experience in the first 3 weeks, I was able to save more money than what my budget was for the entire year. Because they're the kind of skills you learn when you can actually cut across all the different channels. You learn how to manage your audience and you learn what tools to use. And the first thing I used to say to all my clients when I ran the agency is, I don't want you to spend more money. I just want you to spend it better. So to give you an idea of some of the success there, I don't know, a few of you might have seen Mercer mentioned quite frequently in the news, winning awards and doing extremely well, and it was my team, full credit to all of them, that put them there and worked with that team to achieve and kick those goals. So yeah, really quite a different background. I'm consulting at the moment, but that's only because nobody's captured my imagination for me to go and do anything else too many hours a week. And that's where I'm at.
Amazing. Thank you very much. So we're talking about CX, and I'd love to maybe first of all try to define CX. Like, what is CX? Because I think, you know, there's just so many definitions out there and for different people. Lisa, you wanna go first? You know, if you wanted to define CX, what is CX for you?
Every single time the customer comes into contact with your brand for any reason, it's a customer experience. It's that simple. It doesn't matter whether it's for credit, for a purchase, whether they're standing at a pub and someone says, "Where do you work?" And you say, "Hey, I work for that company." That is a customer experience.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, sure. How do you define CX? I think it's probably better off saying, like, why are we trying to define it now?
Well, yeah, that's my next question. Like, why the hype? That's literally the next question that I want to ask. Why are we getting so much hype around CX?
Yeah, I mean, because I mean, so Peter Drucker, one of the original management consultants, said in the 1950s that the only purpose of a business is to create a customer, and every single element around, you build every single element around the customer. So why are we trying to define it now? Why are we trying to define and redefine what customer experience is now? Is it because somehow businesses have lost sight of that? I think that, or, you know, we've been through a phase where there has been a more of a command and control model, and consumers have got more power. That might be a lot of what's driving it. Also, you know, probably just basic economics as well, where, you know, businesses have scaled very, very quickly during times of economic growth, to then realise that if you actually spend money on making your customer happy, making them loyal, making them, you know, ensuring that they're going to advocate your brand, then your return on investment's enormous, and they tend to be the ones performing best in terms of our share price. So that might be it.
Yeah, and Lisa, what do you think? Just like Mark said, you know, Drucker talked about this in the 50s. We were previously talking about it. Ogilvy talked about it in the again, also mid-50s. Amazon has talked about it in the 90s of, I think Bezos has this famous saying where, the team are super paranoid and he comes in about their competition. He comes in and says, don't worry, why would you be worried about your competition? It's your customer who's going to be sending you money. Your competition is never going to send you money. And that was in the 90s. What is the hype about?
I think it's just hype. I think we go through cycles. I'm probably going to show my age, but I remember probably in the mid to late 90s, it was all about customer service and customer service standards, customer service excellence, and then there's these cycles that happen, and I think CX is, to some extent, it is a bit about customer service, but it's about so much more. And I could say, just like Lisa and Mark, it is about all the interactions you have with with your customer. That is sort of a very high level. If I were to break it down and sort of make it, perhaps a little bit more granular, I'd perhaps say customer experience is perhaps everything that wraps around your product or service proposition. So perhaps that's another way to look at it, but everyone defines it quite differently, and it really depends on your organisation. Yeah.
Gotcha. Just out of curiosity, how did you define it at ASOP?
Really interestingly, when I arrived at ASOP, you would never even say that word, customer experience. In fact, most marketing terms were not mentioned. I was specifically, there were no circles, there was no pyramids, there was no anything, and really it was like, and I remembered the founder specifically saying, Lisa, just don't bring me a triangle or a square or a circle. Do not bring me any of that language. So I changed the language, but it wasn't something that was set up as such, because it's just so intrinsic in the brand. I did bring in customer experience framework. I started to have people speak about where they were at, like looking at where are problems in various markets as part of the overall customer sort of journey, I guess. But it didn't, we didn't talk about it in specifics because it was just intrinsic to the brand. It's just what happens. I guess when you start talking about digital and omni-channel and all of that, that's when you sort of really have to start to define new language within the business, because we didn't speak the general marketing speak. Right.
And if we wanted to still take a high level view, and Mark, I want to ask you this question. Where do you see CX, particularly in Australia right now? These terms usually maybe originate in Europe and in the US. What do you think is the state of CX here in Australia, and is it any different from what we see in other places?
Well, from my perspective, you've probably got to look at that from like two different angles. So one is looking at it from the angle of business investment following like major events. So if we go back to 2007 with the GFC, there was obviously a major event, and most businesses around the world did the following things, which was, first of all, cut costs and try and keep wages flat. So there was digital transformation, even though it wasn't called that, was fundamentally about that. And while they were doing that and that big spend, the thing that changed was, of course, social media blew up and digital blew up and all the different channels, and they went, oh, hang on, it's much, much harder getting a hold of a customer and understanding where that customer is than it ever has been before. So we now need to invest in getting to that customer where they are, and that's where it became about CRM, marketing automation. There was all, the businesses like Salesforce were born in that environment. And then we're moving into the third phase right now, which is, as they've got closer and closer to the customer, actually some of our core revenue streams are at risk, and we need to reinvent our business. So it's business model evolution. Best example of that in Australian market and Australia context is Telstra. They went through all three of those. They're in the middle. They're in the right bang in the middle of that third phase right now, trying to reinvent themselves from being a telco to a techco, which basically means they're trying to move revenue, the majority of their revenue, away from their traditional areas over into consulting and technology build and compete on a global stage. So that's one context. The other context is so that was happening globally, but the other part of that is how did Australian businesses respond? And I've got somewhat some interesting observations there, because during that period we were doing quite a lot of consulting with SAP North America, and we were looking at we're working inside their transformation office and looking at different ways that they could reinvent their business. And the thing that struck me was the clarity of vision and discussion that their leaders were having, so the executives were having. And every single one of them said, when we sat down and had a chat to them, said, why are you doing this? And they said, look, our economy's in free fall, and as a result, our shareholders are losing confidence, our market cap's getting eroded.
What year was this?
This was in late, so it's probably around 2009, 2010. And so our economy's in free fall, our shareholders are losing confidence, and if we don't reinvent our business, we're screwed, basically. So we need to look at every line of business and every single product set, and we need to reinvent what we do. And we know that the majority of that is going to fail, but the 10% that works is going to reinvent our business for the next 50 years. And I think that was incredibly courageous and incredibly, and they're still going through that process. Whereas at that very same time period in Australia, we had business leaders saying, oh, the rest of the world looks really scary, and we've got mining, and our economy's doing all right, let's not rock the boat, let's see what happens. And then all of a sudden, it was basically not really moving too much. And then all of a sudden that lack of action turned into, oh, we need to catch up because all these other businesses overseas have been innovating and doing all these really cool things. We need to catch up. And then that catch up turned into, we need to leapfrog ahead, which means we're going to buy big pieces of technology that are going to be silver bullets and save everything. Whereas, in fact, it was actually more to do with having to go through the pain of bringing teams together, breaking them apart, and nothing to do with the technology in the vast majority of the time.
Yeah, very interesting. And you touched on, a major factor of that was bringing teams together. And Lisa, I know that that is one of the main themes that you look at when you're defining CX, the team and looking internally. Can you tell us a little bit about that, of how do you see when you're talking about customer experience, where does the internal team of a company come in?
Well, that's where you begin.
Okay, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Hint, hint, I'm a Richard Branson fan, and if you're in marketing and you're not, you really need to go study the guy. For me, it all begins internally with your own people, because if they actually don't believe the message, they don't convey it. It's that simple. So one of the hardest things for executives to do, and I know I've sat in enough boardrooms, is to listen. But if you do it well and you listen to all of your people and you start there with CX, you find out what the customer really wants. And just adding on to what Mark was saying, I think a lot of the change in Australia came from fear. And I worked for an organisation that turned over 250 million in Australia in the 90s, so circa $1 billion today. I took over what was left of it about 5 years ago for the company I was running. And we had this conversation yesterday, who was Google? Who was Uber? Who was Apple? So, 100 years ago, whoever was at the top of the tree was still going to be at the top of the tree the next 5 years, the next 5 years, the next 5 years. But now the whole audience has changed, and the audience power has changed. And the power of those people that work for you is absolutely enormous. I used to walk past my staff all the time, and if they weren't sort of like smiling, I'm not talking about 24/7, but I'd actually grab them and go, hey, what's up? You're having a bad day. Because every time they picked up the phone, that was the message they gave. And that's the customer experience. And I don't care which department you're in, and I don't care who you're talking to, but let's also talk about the customer experience. If you're in finance and you're talking to someone in sales who's representing a customer concern, that accounts person's talking to their customer. Yeah? So that's why I'm saying it's intrinsic. Every time your brand gets mentioned in everything that you do, you have to start with your own people internally and your own internal culture, and then push that out of the organisation. So I've always started with the people transformation. So when I used to take over companies, the first thing I'd do, and it damn near killed me, got to tell you, but I would go and jump on planes and I would visit every single site we'd taken over, and I would make sure that I spoke to every single person. I'm not talking about sitting there with the managers, oh, you're all so important, who cares, right? I'm talking about walking to the warehouse and saying to the guy that picks the goods that go to your customer, hey, how's your day, what's going on? How can we help you? Yeah? So that's how you transform a business, so that you've got happy people, so that every time they interact with your customer, there is a better opportunity that your customer's going to be happy and they're going to try and find a way. And the other thing is trust. Don't have people working for you if you think they're shit. Get rid of them. That way you can actually trust people to do their jobs. It's a really big revelation. And then you let them do it, you let them think. When I walked into Eric and they handed me all these scripts, I said, you are shitting me. Do I have a bunch of monkeys? Right? I hate scripts. How dare you treat me like I'm nothing? Customer experience is all about recognising me as an individual and my dealings that I've had with your organisation in the past. If you don't know what they are, it's your problem. You probably won't keep me as a customer. Yeah? Sorry, long-winded answer.
No, that's all right.
It's my soapbox.
No, thank you very much for that. And it's very interesting that you bring up people and you talk about how it's important to be internal, to start internal. But the question that I want to follow up on that one, and also it would be great if we could have the questions up on the screen so we could see what people are posting. But the question that I want to ask after that, and Lisa, it would be awesome to get your input on that. It's amazing when the board has buy-in for CX, and you know, we want to become customer centric and we want to focus on the customer. In a lot of situations, that's not the case. In a lot of situations, usually maybe the marketing or a department that deals heavily with the customer comes across the concept, or they're very excited about it and they want to push it through the organization and make it a thing. And sometimes, again, the board has not have that exposure to the customer. What is the best way, or what do you suggest is the best approach for someone in the marketing team or some other team to convince the board to take a look at CX and customer experience and taking that into consideration? What would be your approach?
Look, my approach with these sorts of initiatives is pretty straightforward, and particularly if you're speaking with boards and you're trying to get something up. If your CX initiative does not tie into a business imperative, you're doomed. You're doomed from the very, very beginning. So you need to understand what the business drivers are and what the business goals of the organisation are, and make sure that whatever CX initiative you're wanting to run or planning to run ties directly in. So if there is an issue, for example, that it's a customer acquisition matter and that's the business objective, that's what your CX initiative potentially revolves around. If it is something around conversion or what have you, but it must tie into a business imperative, and you need to show results back to the business imperative. If you don't, you're going to do a whole lot of work and it won't go anywhere. It's as simple as that. So make sure you understand what's going on in the business and make sure that your initiative ties directly in. That's really what a board's interested in. That's what your CEO's interested in. That is how you'll make traction. It's as simple as that.
I might just jump in there as well, just quickly. I mean, you also have to think about what a role of a board is. You know, a role of a CEO is to focus on revenue, vision, where is the organisation heading, and where are we going to pull in new revenue or new revenue streams. The CIO is focused on how do I enable that vision and make sure the technology is there. CFOs, like, how do I make sure that the business, doesn't go broke while we're trying to build this new thing? CMO, obviously, how do we find and engage an audience? But the board is 100% focused on risk. How do we prevent the organisation drifting into an area that's highly risky? So in that context, if you want the board to pay attention to CX, think about what metrics you're using. Are you using Net Promoter Score inside your organisation? Well, then do work and flip it. Don't look at it being a lagging indicator of customer satisfaction. No board member gives a shit about that, to be honest. Honestly, they just don't give a shit. What you need to do is do the work and show how Net Promoter Score is a leading indication of potential financial risk. And if you can do that, then every single board member not only will pay attention, but they almost have a legal obligation to pay attention.
Absolutely valid.
Thank you very much for that. We have a question on the board, and this is something we talked about. And we're like, should we talk about it or should we not talk about it? And it's about tools. It's the top question.
It's about tools and boards.
And exactly. So the question is, what are some of the recommended tools, platforms to map out the customer experience? Now, just to give you a little bit of background about
Post-it notes.
About That's the high-tech tool that you can use. We had a bit of a discussion whether we should talk about tools or not. And the challenge with tools is everybody's very excited about tools. They're cool. They sound like they're the silver bullet, and they're going to solve all our problems. And we had a little bit of a debate of whether to talk about tools or not. But now we have to talk about tools. So I don't know, who wants to take that question?
Okay. I'll be the victim. Salesforce used to train you not only on their tools but on everybody else's so that you could sell competitively and understand the differences with those tools. And it was great training. And one of the things is just about every customer that I walked into in my time, and bear in mind if there's any of you here, sorry, ANZ Bank, Mercer, some huge retailers. I'll try not to get too personal on that front. Every single one of them that I walked into had a whole heap of redundant tools, or tools that they purchased for a specific function that they were using in their ecosystem, where they might be using about 90% of the value of the tool. Does that make sense? So somebody says, oh, I want to map out CX, what's the best tool to use? Probably most of the time you've already got tools in your organisation that you can use. So I know in Salesforce you can actually map out the journey. You can do a journey map at the front end. But I actually gave you a bit of a heads up on some new software that's being developed from someone in my ecosystem. The word had to come out, didn't it? At the moment, and that is to create a canvas where you can literally drag and drop best practice functionality via email, mobile, social, whatever channel you're going to use, even print, onto a canvas, and it will actually pull in the HTML at the back end, and you can drop it into Salesforce, Adobe, HubSpot, whatever you like. That's a good tool worth investing in if they get it right. But as far as everything else, I have to be really honest with you. I actually use I'd have to go and find it on my phone because there's about 25,000 apps on there, Lucidchart. Because when you're actually creating a customer journey, what you've got to remember is the first journey should actually not be the last journey that you're activating, because best practice dictates we test and learn. And after every iteration, after every time we actually go out and activate that campaign, even if it's just stage one, we should be looking at our data and analytics and saying, is it working? And if it's not, we should tweak it. And this is why I love Lucidchart, because I can move everything everywhere. Yeah? So beware of specific tools, because they're one group or one organisation's opinion, and always look at what you've got first.
And the name of the other tool that you mentioned?
That's coming out?
Yes.
The developer is Prophecy Marketing. It's another startup I have a vested interest in. and there's a
So it was a
bunch
plug.
of it's actually not a plug. I was so blown away when I saw this, because one of the things that really annoys me, like we took ANZ off a platform they were on to put them onto Salesforce, and in raw cost it was about 150 grand a man hours. So a tool like this is actually valuable because you can pick it up and you can transport it to different platforms and you can get some independence. So I really, really love it. And no, I haven't nutted out a deal or whatever, but it's really fresh in my mind because I saw it on the weekend activating correctly for the first time. So it's brand new tech coming out of Melbourne.
Thank you very much.
I mean, we talked about this, but didn't we? Yeah, I mean, we talked about this on the call the other day, which was sort of saying, I mean, if you're asking about tools, I'm sorry if I offend the person asking this question, but I mean, if you're asking about tools, you need to ask yourself why. Because vast majority of the time, if you're saying, what's the best tool and what the underlying question is, everything's complicated, how do I find something to make it less complicated? You don't. No technology is going to make things less complicated. It's only just going to make things much more complicated. What you need to do is think about what is your strategy, what is your strategic intent, and get that really super simple and clear. And then any tool set that may fall off the back of it will just be obvious.
Yeah, look, I think from my perspective, I think what I find is I sort of get asked this a few times, and I agree with Mark. You need a strategy first and think about that first. Think about what the imperatives are and work to that. The only challenge I have with, there's a lot of great platforms out there and tools to use, but think very carefully. Everyone's using very similar tools. Everyone's doing best practice. You're all identical. Everything comes out bland, frictionless, boring, and you're following the herd. So you actually have to think a lot more, you have to think outside the square. If we all follow best practice, we all look exactly the same. We all do exactly the same, and you're not different. You're not going to stand out. It's not interesting. So your experience really has to be tied into, what's the experiential signature you want to leave with your target audience. That's where you sort of start. You start to think about that and you start to design around it. And then you start thinking about, well, what are the things out there that can help me achieve that? Yeah. So please don't follow the herd. Don't be like everyone else, because you're not going to achieve. Yeah. You won't deliver.
Yeah, I mean, like marketing automation is a prime example, isn't it? Where best practice is, has said, go and collect as much information around your customer as you possibly can, understand as much as you possibly can, and then send out increasingly intelligent, personalised messaging, because that's what your customers want. Bullshit. Your customers don't want that. Yeah, I mean, bullshit. The customers don't want that. Honestly, they don't want that. Like, it's that. Well, I mean, what happens, particularly for a public business, sort of listed business, is that you have to make huge investments in that technology, and then the shareholders want to get a return on that investment. And then as marketers, we're caught on this cycle of going, well, we need to look for quick wins. And it gets, you get in this short-term cycle where all you're actually doing is creating smarter and smarter spam. You're not actually doing anything your customers care about.
Exactly right.
One of the biggest problems that we found with a lot of the organisations that we were dealing with is that they actually work from the ground up, i.e. we need to do a campaign for March. Great. What's your message? What do you need to do, Oh, we need to think of a strategy. Go the other way and start with your outcome. Always start with your outcome. This is a lesson I got taught when I was a rookie selling print. Start with what you want to achieve and work your way backwards. So here's what I want to achieve. This is my strategy. Of all of the tools at my disposal, these are the tools I need to use to attract these different audience segments. The more you know about your customer, the more information that you can collect, right? If you can have a single source of truth on your customer. I know it's very difficult for some companies, but it's also psychologically difficult for CIOs, who I love to fight with. You can even dump data into a spreadsheet if you get really desperate. I did not have a single platform in an insurance company turning over whatever it was, $250 million, at my disposal. I used MailChimp, I used Excel, I used Lucid Chart. I bought them all on my credit card because no one needed to approve a bloody thing. But I didn't know what I wanted to use. I also didn't know what staff I needed at the time. So I used agencies, I used consultants, I used 4 or 5 creative people to get different flavours and get cut through. And we changed the plot completely. They thought I was a little bit nuts. I did Santa on a beach, you know, on a Christmas mailing. The only reason I did the Christmas mailing is I needed to clean up my bloody database. And some idiot said they wanted to charge us $120,000. I said, get lost. The whole thing cost us $7,200 of my time. Yeah? So the greatest tool you actually have is this one, turn it on. Okay, that means forgetting a lot of the stuff you learnt at uni. Switch it on, because the answer is not always in a book, it's not always at the end of Google. And the other answer that's a real ripper, and I reckon all 3 of us have done this plenty of time, this thing, right? That'll work. That's really shit. Don't do it. You know, again, old school. If it looks like shit, smells like shit, it's probably shit. Okay? Very first thing that I do, and I did as an executive who got 200, 300, 400 emails per day. The first thing I do when I turn on my computer is I go through and I go tick, 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 and I delete all the crap I'm not going to read. And most of it are marketing emails because it's not relevant, it's not timely, it's not individual. It's not interesting to me when you send me an email about a men's clothing sale. I'm single. I like it that way. I don't want to buy a guy suit. Yeah?
Thank you very much. Thanks. I love it. I love these answers.
Sorry.
This is great. I love the conversations around tools. There's usually multiple schools of thoughts on it, and you know, as Brian was mentioning earlier in the night, we're in the account-based marketing space, and it's very interesting in ABM, and I feel like that's kind of the same thing in CX, where ABM as a concept has been around for about 15 years. It really came about by a company called ITSMA in the US, and they developed the concept of ABM, account-based marketing. But it didn't really come to shine, or it didn't really surface until about 5 years ago. And the reason it didn't surface and people didn't start talking about it was because, or they did start talking about it 5 years ago, was the technology caught up. And you were able to implement account-based marketing through technology. And what that did was, basically companies with VC backing, technology companies with VC backing came into the space, and they had that venture capital funds to push account-based marketing in the market. And what that did was everybody associated ABM with a tool. And everybody said, you know, we need this tool in order to implement ABM. And I feel like that's quite similar in the CX space as well, where, you know, the concepts have been around for a while. As we said, in the 50s, the concepts of customer experience have been discussed, but it's been in recent years where you have, again, the venture capital funding being put behind these massive organizations of Salesforce and Marketo and so on and so forth that have the word CX has become a thing, and then a lot of us associate that with tools.
I agree. Like I mean, I never understood how not to be customer centric because I'm what was called in the old days a direct marketer, and back in those days. You know, I was journey mapping, and it was just A3 sheets of paper that you would stick together on a wall, and it would be a very complicated map of if this happened, this does this, if this happens, this does this, like send this. And then you would sit there and you'd work out this thing called the allowable to say, well, what could we invest in behind that? So there's all different terms these days, but the strategy is the strategy is still the same. You're still doing the same. And you know, I distinctly, for a big chunk of my career, I worked in the automotive industry, so many of the major brands, and we built a very detailed program for Ford over the years, and looked at how could we bring more customers, you know, how could we build some retention modelling, and you know, what would it mean to get people to rebuy their vehicles. And we looked at a lot of, again, to use Mark's terms, like leading indicators, like, you know, we'd worked out, for example, that if we understood when a customer said they thought they were likely to buy their next car, would they buy it? And we proved that that actually was true. And so we would start to develop various models and various plans on how could we build incremental sales from some of the work we did, and we could prove that out. That then got rolled out through 9 different markets through Asia, but with some variations, of course, because people were at different stages of car ownership. But these things have been around for years. We have the tools now, so it's a bit sexier and it's a lot easier, a hell of a lot easier than it was back then. So it's easy, and yes, you're right, it is easier, but it is more complicated. But I do encourage you, you know, you don't need the tools, and sometimes actually working back and working on paper actually gives you, it actually changes the way you think. So, you know, I encourage you to, you know, think broadly about how you apply it. Tools are fantastic. God, they make life easier, but they are also more complex in some ways. But sometimes just map it out. And I must say, just as an aside, when you do that, there are some real benefits. Management is walking around. I mean, just most recently, I did a project with a company, and we discovered they had some really fantastic mapping and a really fantastic model for customer experience, both from an employee experience, but also from a customer experience. But they had some real issues that we discovered in the pre-sale side of selling, and they were selling homes. And I think, you know, by actually mapping it out physically on walls made a huge difference to buy-in. And if you think about a lot of the new models, sort of a lot of topical things like design thinking and lean, all of that is being done graphically and on walls for a reason. So think about that when you're mapping. It doesn't all need to be locked down.
I love that.
That really works too. One of the things that we did at Eric, we painted every available piece of wall. There's actually a company comes in, and it's like a contact that you can put across the wall, even if it's rented. And what we did was turned every wall and in meeting rooms into a whiteboard. Because give me a pen and I'm dangerous. Microphone's bad, but pen's worse, trust me. And we would draw, literally, we had a wall like that in the boardroom. And one day when we were talking about changing things, I just kept getting up and adding, rubbing pieces out and then adding. And at the end, you know, everyone's sitting there in the boardroom and said to me, "What's that?" And I said, "Well, that's how we deliver the strategy you've been talking about today. I think I've got most of it right through listening, but can you all take a look and pick the hell out of that for me?" And then we left it up there, and people would come in and out, and they'd come over and go, "Is that your scribble all over the boardroom?" And I'd say, "Yeah, guilty." And they'd say, "Oh, you missed this piece here and here." And I'd go, "Tell me more, this is great, let's walk." Yeah?
Love it.
Fantastic.
I mean, I just add one little bit to that as well, which is just think about, like, well, why you're doing that as well. Sometimes mapping the experiences out isn't just about marketing or communications as well. I mean, we did a piece of work with the largest radiology group in New Zealand recently, and so it was owned by a bunch of radiologists, and so radiologists are really super highly educated people, but because they're so highly educated and so highly technical, they're not exactly what you would call people. You know, they've sort of got to this point. So we were trying to get them to invest in patient experience and artificial intelligence and all these new things that were coming down the pipe that was going to change the shape of their organisation, and there was a lot of resistance. So we just used the old photocopy room, basically. We moved everything out, and we mapped out all the patient journeys, all the journeys of their families and supporters and the referrers and the staff and everything else. And then we could bring in the shareholders, radiologists in one by one and say, hey, look, here's your little patch of the world. And if we don't make a change here, here is the role and implications for the patient experience. And here's the role and implications for your staff experience. And here's how much it's going to cost you. And really, really quickly, they went, oh, yeah, we should probably fix that then.
Whiteboards. Yeah, we have a joke that we say a company's success is directly correlated to the meter square of whiteboard they have in their office. That's amazing. Now, look, I'm going to put this aside, and I'm going to just go through because we have a couple of good questions on the board. So the first question, the second question, the first one was the tool, but the other question that has got a lot of votes is the difference between CX and UX. Lisa, you wanna take that one?
Oh wow, thanks.
If you don't want to, we could pass it on to Mark.
Look, I think of, in my very simplistic way, I think of UX as being around the product and actually trying to get the product to work or the service to work. Whereas for me, customer experience is much broader, and it's what wraps around the product or the proposition. So I see. That's kind of how I see it. I don't particularly love the term user, so I ban it in the environment.
Is it up there with consumer?
No, I just have a, I don't know. It's a personal thing, but I think that the term user is, to me, I just think of tech. The only people that use the word users are pharmaceuticals or drug dealers or technology companies, so I just don't like it. I just have an issue. So it's a personal thing, and because language is very important, certainly in my ESOP days, I wouldn't use that word. I hated it, so I got rid of it, but I just like using the customer, so that's just me. That's my opinion.
Right. No, I think you're right that it's heavily product focused rather than some of the
talking to how the actual tech will work, what's going on within the proposition or the technology or the product or service you're designing versus wrapping it with a customer experience around it. Yeah.
I mean, CX has a lot to do with how you designing and measuring the customer experience end to end, and then inside of that you've got human-centered design as a broad and rapidly expanding set of disciplines, and inside of that you have service design, which is looking at how your organisation is designing services. You've got system design, which is how does your organisation work and interact with other organisations. You've got experience design, and then you've got UX, and then other elements that sit inside of that. And UX is obviously right down at the how does this particular tool work, and how are people going to engage with it and respond to it, and how might that ladder back up to your organisational strategy.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna squeeze in two more questions because we're running a little bit behind. But we are gonna take the next 5 questions and answer them with the speakers on our Slack channel. So if you are not on our Slack channel is we'll share the link towards the end of the talk. So those questions will get answered. But the other one that is up there is sausages and Bunnings is like what customer experience is to. How would you finish that sentence? Should we come back to that one? Yeah. We'll come back to that one.
I've been trying to think of something witty for that.
I noticed that you probably have read that question and haven't said anything. So we'll maybe give it a little bit more time and come back to it. The next one is, what are some of your most memorable customer experiences that you have implemented yourself? Now, Lisa, I know you had a good example at ASOP. Do you want to talk about that?
I can't say I implemented it, but I think probably just to make a point and probably to earlier, can everyone hear me? Is my microphone working? Okay, yeah, it's on. So I obviously didn't implement this, so I'll call that out. But earlier I spoke about the need to be different and to not follow best practice. And I think ESOP as a brand certainly doesn't follow best practice or follow the usual. And I think from an experience, just to give a very practical example, hands up, has anyone who's been in an ESOP store? Loads of people, okay. If we followed what the customer said, and what, and you'd research customers, and be careful with what you ask customers as well, as just an aside. Be very careful with the questions you ask. But if we asked a customer what you would need in a store to buy skincare and beauty products, I would pretty much guarantee they'd say we want convenience, we want ease, we want control, we want everything organised, we want everything labelled, right? There'd be, and if you go into many pharmacy stores or even in your cosmetics departments of a department store, everything is very logical. You can see it, it's bright, it's labelled with, you've got your skincare over here, your shampoos over there. What happens when you go into an Aesop store, right? First of all, it's dark. It's not bright. You can't actually read all the labels very clearly. You actually need help to read them because it's not easy, and if you're probably over 40, it gets harder and harder. It's very hard to distinguish between the products. You don't know what category you're in. It completely counters everything that I've just said, that people would ask for. But it works. And it works on many layers because it's using humans in a store to speak to you. It's about connecting with somebody. It's about being greeted. It's about the scent that you smell when you probably down, probably 5 metres outside the door. You can, it's hitting a whole lot of cues for you. It calms you down. It doesn't rev you up. Think about that with your brand. What's the signature you want to leave behind? Doing what customers say they want. Like if I'd asked a customer, I guarantee they're the standard things that you would do. And if you do what the customer says all the time and only think about that, you'll be just like everybody else. Yeah. So really think hard about it. And they're the experiences that are memorable, the ones that sort of, in my mind, I think about it as, your brain remembers whether your expectations have been met or they haven't been met. Things that are memorable deviate from what naturally, if things meet your expectation, you'll probably forget them, right? And sometimes I'm concerned about that when people talk about frictionless experiences or seamless experiences. They're good. They're good for some things, don't get me wrong. Like there's probably some utilities and things where that is really vital. I don't want my banking to have friction in it, I really don't. I'd get very upset. But friction actually creates connection. And so there are moments in your customer experience where you need the grit, because the grit is actually what creates something really special. So don't be afraid of that and be very, very careful about what questions you ask customers and use your head. Think about it. Don't take it verbatim. In the advertising world, as another example, I can't tell you how many briefs. Everybody thinks that they're doing something or saying something different. In the clients that I would see, they're all saying exactly the same thing because they're all asking exactly the same questions. And when you challenge that, they go, oh, no, but this is what the customer said. We're not going to get it wrong if we follow the research. Listen to the research, listen to your customer, but then use your head and think about where there are moments where you can create the right level of friction to create a moment that's memorable, because that's what you want. You want memorability. Only memorable brands grow, so it's really important. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Friction. Lisa, anything from your side?
I just think that's a fabulous response. Who wants to be just like everybody else? And who wants to get the same thing, just a different day? It's really boring. We used to actually tell our customers quite frequently, send less email. Salesforce didn't like it, but we didn't really care much about that. It was all about only send an email when you have something that's relevant, timely, and valid to say, because then people will actually want to open them, because they'll know that you do that. Whereas if you spam them, Thursday, 2 p.m. every week with the same shit. I mean, newsletters. Don't you love newsletters? I really care what's happening in your organisation. No, I don't. Not at all. I'm not interested. Tell me what it means to me, and what it means to the company I'm working for, or me as an individual, or my child, or whatever it may be. But otherwise, I don't really care. That's nice, that's good. I'm glad you're happy, but I'm busy. Yeah? And I really love the way that you put that. Who wants to be like everybody else? You know, I remember sitting there with a CEO years ago and he said to me, do you want to be sales director, of More Corp Australia? And I said, yeah, not yet. I said, I'm not ready to get that calm. And he said to me, well, let me give you an example of what you need to do. Put out your hands. I said, okay, so I put out my hands. And in one he put the sugar bowl, and in the other he put my coffee cup. He said, now talk. I said, can't, tongue-tied. German, yeah? My hands go all over the place. They're fairly moderated now. But what he wanted to do was paint me the same as everybody else. And yet, out of an organisation that operated in 53 countries, I was in the top 10 most profitable. But I didn't do it like everyone else. I didn't follow the sales structure. And they'd say to me, how are you so successful? I'd go, shit, I don't know. I just go and listen to the customer. Yeah? But I would listen to them individually, because when you pull them all together, which I think was your point, you're going to get this vanilla. And some people love vanilla a lot, don't they?
Look, I think some people do, and I think, probably just another point to add, I've been spending probably in about the last 6 months a lot more time with startups, because I've been fascinated by just the thinking and well, it's an interesting, there's some interesting models and look, there's some interesting things going on there, but it's very much, and this is where I think this mentality of doing a lot of automation, a lot of, sending emails or doing whatever, because it's about gaming the system. And it's sort of gaming. And look, to an extent, that will get you to a point to get you some very quick growth, but it wears out pretty quickly, right? And then you get stuck. You scale, you'll get to a point, and then you just get stuck, and you can't get any more growth. And so, I read everything, and I'm certainly very interested, and I do appreciate that there are things that you can do, particularly in an online context, where you can game things to get you some initial growth. But if you're looking for sustainability, be very, very careful. If you're looking for a few quick wins and getting in and getting out of a product, fantastic, knock yourself out, do that. But if you want sustainable business and you want to build something, you need to create some memorability, and you need to start thinking, thinking long term, as well as obviously doing your short term things that help, but think for the long term.
I mean, you have to think,
yeah, please go for it. I want to ask you the next question, but go for it.
Okay, I was just going to add, if you have a very good understanding of the customer experience, if you have a combination of a good understanding about your customer's experience, a really good understanding about the broader market, and then bravery and a deep understanding about your brand, and then you've got technology, then you can do things that change the world. So take Nike years ago when they were thinking about part of their digital strategy. They're going, is our brand about selling shoes or selling clothes? No, it's about performance. Okay, let's put a sensor inside people's shoes and help them track how far they're running, and then we'll create some little website where they can track that. Oh, hang on, people are really interested in that. Okay, let's keep going. All of a sudden, it became a wristband, and then it became like an app on the phone, and then it became, an app on the Apple Watch, and then it gave birth to Garmin and Fitbit and everything else. And all of a sudden, they're actually changing the world. And I remember as that technology was really, first starting up, and I was, going for a run, and somebody hit the Facebook like button, and all of a sudden there were people clapping in my ear. I went, well, hey, that's weird. But they were trying shit out, They were trying stuff out. And we know full well, the Nike Plus model and those apps have expanded out and further. There's probably going to be some point in the not too distant future where I put it in my headphones and Nike's voice says to me, "Morning, Mark, I've got your personalised fitness regimes planned out for you today. Let's go." And then all of a sudden, I'm going to have a personalised relationship with Nike. That voice will all of a sudden become part of the brand.
But depending on what it is, that can be spooky as hell. So beware, because of your own experiences. The one thing that I find people often do is they have these really, really great ideas, but they don't sit there and say, what if that was me at the receiving end? I remember the first time I was driving out of my house and, I've got the iPhone and, it does everything bar make my breakfast, which I don't eat, so that's all right. And I'm driving along and all of a sudden it said to me, 7 minutes to Scoresby, to your office or something to that effect. I went, oh shit, that is really spooky. And then the other day I had the weirdest experience. I was talking about a topic. Actually, no, I was talking about one of my former staff members from about 8 years ago. And I couldn't even remember her name. It was that obscure, and it was a 2-tiered surname. And we were chatting about her and I said, oh no, that was her name. And the next day on Facebook, that person jumped up as a suggested friend. And I rang my girlfriend and said, okay, Siri's spying on me. This is really creepy. So just beware, because a lot of people don't like their privacy invaded. They like to be individual, they like to be recognised, which is cool if they have a relationship with you. But also be careful what you assume in your relationships with your customer. Deal with facts.
Right. Now, this, again, dovetails really nicely into the last question.
Geez, I'm good to you.
What was that?
I'm good to you, aren't I?
Yes, you are. Absolutely. I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Lisa. The next one is about where is CX going? Particularly the question says, it is estimated by next year, 2020, 85% of customer experiences interactions will be completed without interacting with a human. What does that mean for CX? So we've actually talked about this very briefly of where CX is going in the next year, 2, 5 years. Where do you think CX is going? Are these tools and customization, personalization through AI is going to take over, or there's room for human interaction? Where do you see CX's journey?
Look, I think from my perspective, I love all things AI, and I think that there's a role for all these things and all these platforms and all these tools, and I certainly envisage a lot more interactions that will all happen, using technology, and that's going to continue. But I think that there is a place also, and a pendulum swinging back to humanity. I think that if you want to, we're humans dealing with humans. There are times I'm prepared to deal with a machine, but there are times that are just, it's fantastic to deal with another human being, because that's what connection is really about. It's not really about what's going on our phones. So I think that there's a role to play for both. I think it just depends on the brand. So think about your brand and where is a human touch required. If anyone's interested, there's a lot of really good thinking that goes on. I've been part of a think tank in Europe, and they do a lot of thinking in this space. Look up the House of Beautiful Business, and that's a think tank that happens every year that talks about the future of technology, humanity, and ways of work. And it is pretty out there. Some of the topics are really, really, they're really out there, but we discuss it a lot, and I think that we'll see the pendulum swinging back with people wanting their privacy, wanting to move back to having that sort of engagement. Not to say that tech's going to go, because it's there, it's going to be there, and sometimes it does things so much better, and we should use it and capitalise on it.
And there's a lot of money in there, so people aren't going to let that evolve. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, we've done a lot of work in that space. So with some of our customers over the years, have done quite a lot of work and trying to do some futurism. So where is the space going to go? You're absolutely right. Currently, in the current environment, there is a very poor experience when it comes to our personal data, in so much as that it's owned by the Facebooks and the Googles and so on of the world. And that can create, because of their commercial pressure, create experiences like the one you just talked about, where all of a sudden I've looked at a pair of shoes and that pair of shoes follows me around the web forever. Or I've talked to somebody on the phone and all of a sudden they come up as a recommended friend. It's crossing that uncanny valley. That's creepy, horrible stuff. However, and this is some of the work that we did, is saying there is probably a whole market category that needs to be created for technology to be empowered for us as consumers. So all the data I create as a consumer has value, has an intrinsic value. Admittedly, The value erodes over time, but it has value. And so who's getting value from that at the moment? Not me, most of the time. Most of the time, I'm just the product. So if there were a market category and all the data I created and every signal I created as I'm moving through the world was put into one spot and I could choose how businesses use it, then that would really, really change the face of that dynamic that we're currently in at the moment, and it would allow technology to be put into the hands of us. So I did some work this is part of the work we're doing with SAP. We talked about that. We talked about the kind of the broader economics behind it and how that could work. And we started getting quite theoretical very quickly. And we got some feedback back from one of the customers saying, the client saying, hey, kind of interesting, but could you just tell us what that would look like? What would that look and feel like for a consumer? We did this work, as I said, sort of 2010. So things like Alexa and those kinds of things were just kind of ideas at that point. But we went through this process of saying, look, if all the data that I created was in one spot, how would it be useful for me? And the way it would be useful is it would help me make better decisions on a day-to-day basis. How might that surface? Well, then the obvious place would be surface in some kind of digital assistant, something that's helping me move through life. Not something that's trying to market to me, but something that's trying to help me make better decisions. And so we created this fictional character called Alice. And Alice, sort of lives in the near future. And she has a digital assistant that only ever asks her one question. Hey, what do you want to do? What do you want to do today, tomorrow, or the rest of your life? And in this particular scenario, we had Alice waking up on a Monday morning, and as per every Monday morning, the digital assistant said, hey, morning Alice, what do you want to do today? And she said, last week I worked late every single night, and I really want to get out and do some exercise this weekend. So if you've got anything, let me know. Also, last night I was sitting up and looking at Facebook, and I saw a bunch of my old school friends, and I kind of like to hang out with them, but I haven't really thought about, a way to hang out, and they're all posting their photos of Fiji trips and all that kind of stuff. So just let me know if you've got an idea there. Digital assistant, immediately comes back and says, last summer you played tennis a lot. Do you want to play tennis this weekend? She goes, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Haven't done that for a while. And it says, well, of the friends you're looking at on Facebook, 3 of them are currently playing tennis. You want to see if one of them wants to play with you? She said, yep, sure. Automatically sends a message out to all 3 of them. One of them says, yep, I'd love to play tennis with Alice this weekend. It then automatically finds a tennis court in between their 2 houses, books it in for Saturday morning, and they both go, awesome. But because Alice has said, when it comes to these kinds of interactions, I'm willing to hear from certain brands, and I've picked some brands, and it's not about me being interrupted. This is about my intent, and my intent is I want to do this thing. Somebody help me. And so in this case, the digital assistant says, "Hey, because you're playing tennis this weekend, we have a message from Nike. Do you want to hear it?" She said, "Yeah, sure. Let me hear it." All of a sudden, Nike's voice pops up and says, "Hey, Alice, see you playing tennis this weekend. Would you like to have a free tennis lesson by Roger Federer through your Xbox?" She said, "Yep, sure. That'd be awesome." So she starts every night. She gets home from work. She starts having this virtual tennis lesson with Roger Federer. And then Friday night rolls around and virtual Roger, which now that I say that out loud sounds weird.
Really weird, actually. I'd change that one.
Says to her, "Hey, you've improved enormously this week. I think this tennis racket would be right for you. Click here to customize the color. We'll have it 3D printed and waiting for you by the time you get to the court tomorrow morning." And I think, in many ways, that's where we're heading. That's where we're heading in terms of the technology side of it and customer experience. The thing that's missing at the moment is that we don't own that. We don't own that journey. We don't own that information. It's being held inside different corporations and so on, and they have commercial pressures pushed on them, and they're not. The sharing is difficult. So there's a market category that needs to be created, and if you have a look at a sort of like almost like a hashtag, or but have a look at customer tech. It's one of the fastest growing investment areas in the US at the moment, where this kind of idea, looking at intention. How is my intention getting understood? Can I have multimodal travel? So rather than me saying, I need to book an Uber, and then I need to book a plane, and I want to go to Sydney, and I want to do this and this and this, and do all those things individually, you just go, I'm going to Sydney on this date, and then everything kind of falls into place. that's kind of where we're starting to head.
I love that example. Thank you very much for that. I think we've kind of we'll definitely have gone over time. So on that note, I would love to thank our speaker. If you could help me and put your hands together for our speakers. Now, sausages and Bunnings, anybody? Any takers?
I really liked what Ellen wrote. It's to humans.
Alan?
Customer experience is to humans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, customer experience is to humans. Okay. Thank you very much, Ellen, for covering that for us. Now, as I mentioned on our Slack channel, we're going to answer the last 5 questions. We'll send it to the speakers, and if they have input on any of those questions, they will answer that. So if you want to follow that, if you want to hear about our next events that are coming up, make sure to sign up and register at our Slack channel, which is our Slack channel is growthcolony.org/Slack. So we pretty much share everything over there. Our next event is going to be with Nina Jung. And it's going to be how to boost your marketing and sales with marketing automation. She is the CMO of Made Comfy, an amazing startup in Sydney, and they're seeing some amazing growth. So if that's an area of interest, make sure to sign up. That's going to be a webinar, I think at 11 o'clock next week, if I'm not mistaken, 2nd of October. Yes. So on that note, if you want to stick around, please feel free to do so. We are going to be around for a little longer, and you want to have a chat, please walk up. Thank you so much, and we'll see you at the next event. Thank you.